What I want to do is have a conversation, if you will. And so thinking about leading alliances, and I'll talk from the point of view of, quote unquote, the point person. I am the associate director, but I've been under now 3 different PIs, and about to be 4, as I was abruptly informed last Friday that the new PI is now moving on to do something else. And so I've been the point person for the grant, and I believe you'll hear from Ashanti a little later, and she can attest that, you know, I'm the one that sits in the seat. So from my point of view, from managing the alliance and trying to figure out how to tie this with the purpose of this program and the theme of evaluation, I think what I can bring is the idea of how to manage your program such that it is, as I learned from Kurt this morning, it has evaluability. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. But before I get too far into that, I was thinking about leadership this morning. And as I thought about the idea of what I came to do. And it reminded me of Ken Chenault, who is the CEO of American Express Company. And he talked about, during an interview regarding the tragic 9/11 bombing of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, he talked about leadership. And at that moment, you know, their offices were very close to ground zero. They actually had people who worked in one of the towers. They lost some of their people, and the others were visibly, psychologically, and emotionally scarred by this tragic event. And what was he to do as the leader of this company? And so he talked about leadership in the following. He said a leader's job is to provide a galvanizing vision, to also define reality, and then to give hope. And in that moment, that's what he tried to do. This is what we do as leaders, and as many of you who will be leaders of an alliance, those who work in alliances or lead anything, any organization. We have to create a galvanizing vision, and we have to repeat that vision to anyone who will listen. But we work in a certain context. In that context, we define the reality of the situation. But the work that we do day in and day out, that is the hope. And so much rests on that hope. And though the terrain is often rough, it's unforgiving in some cases, we are still that hope. And we have students, just as Lou mentioned, closing our eyes and thinking of someone who's coming up. This is the reason why we do what we do. So with that, hopefully being kind of the theme here is providing a galvanizing vision and defining reality and giving hope. We keep that in mind throughout this talk. So the first part of what I want to do is I'm just going to call Real Talk. And I mentioned this to a couple of people last night, and they seemed to think it was a good idea, so I trust them. And so if it doesn't work, it's their fault. So thinking about what it takes to have an alliance, to manage alliance, to maintain that alliance, it is a lot of work. But if I were asked, you know, what do you think are some things that you would do and recommend to someone who's trying to create a new alliance? The first thing is to, as it's been said, begin with the end in mind. Think about what you want this program to be at the end of the day. But oftentimes we think about it and it stops here. But as we know, evaluation extends it out. So I think we have to think it all the way through to evaluation. How do we want this experience to be evaluated? And I think Lou mentioned alluded to that last night. And so our job is to manage through all the tough terrain and get us to a place where our program can be fairly evaluated, that the quality of the evaluation can then serve as a tool and not something that terrorizes us. Because most of us, we hear evaluation and we're like, oh my God, you know, and we think of all the things that are not going so well with our own programs, which I did as I started developing this. And as I said, as I sit here and talk to you about managing healthy alliances, something is probably going wrong in mine right now. As a matter of fact, I did receive a call at 8:23 from someone, so I said, oh, there we go. So anyway, but begin with the end in mind. And what the driver of that should be that, and I try to preach it to our coordinators at each institution, that we want our outcomes to be by design and not by default. By design and not by default. Too many times I've seen the people wanting, I won't say they want to, but there's a propensity to kind of let things just happen. And we can't just let things happen. They may come back good, but why chance it? But through effective evaluation and implementation all along the life cycle of the project, you will minimize, you know, those deviations and those chances. Think about as you build your alliance, you want to have the best team that you can have. People who will be dedicated to the project, like those who work with the Nimbus program. You know, I'm hearing and I'm learning that you have very dedicated people. And if you don't have those dedicated people, it's gonna pull at you. You need to have people that you can count on, underneath you and above you. So build a good team and build in mechanisms from the start that will increase your chances of having uniformity and consistency in the actions that you take to facilitate your programs and hopefully in the returns that come back. And you also want to take one of the characteristics that I think may be ubiquitous is that you generally will have, if you have an alliance of institutions, I don't care if it's 3 or in my case I have 14, I'm going to have 1 or 2, but generally I have 1. And I always refer to it as that loosely bound electron out there orbiting, and they may go any which way and upset everything that you're trying to do. And so how do you catch that early? How do you minimize the effect of that? And I will say this, and I won't call their names. I don't see anybody from that institution here, but I don't know who's watching. But I've had one institution that has been just hard to deal with for the 17 years I've been with the LSAMP program. And they've been under different leadership. We've had them under high leadership, under low-level leadership, all in between, and they just don't seem to get it. The sad part about this situation is that actually they have more to gain by being a good partner in the alliance than we have to lose by them not being in there. And it's a sad reality because I don't think they get it. And so I've had to work very hard. It's almost like I deal with the 13 and then I got to deal with the 1. And it happens all the time. So these are, what I'm trying to point out, these are some of the things that we engage and that we have to encounter during the time that we manage our grants, during the time that, over the life cycle of the grant. And so how do these things impact our evaluations? I think sometimes that evaluators may not understand some of the things that we have to do. Sometimes, and it depends. I know none of you are like this, but it depends. Some just want to see the end products and all the things, the sheets, the charts, the data, and so forth and so on, but not really understand what we have to deal with every day just to get to that point. And I think there needs to be some consideration in there. Every institution within your alliance is not equal. And so we may fit in the same category, but each is different, and they all have different characteristics. They all have different cultures. They all have different capacities. And how do you address that in the beginning and forming your alliance? So you have to make sure that you have good partners. I got off script there for a bit, but we'll bring it back. How do you build that team? How do you build in those mechanisms? And the next thing I would say is make a consistent effort to always tell your story. That's something that we kind of learned a little bit late, but tell your story. Tell your story often to anybody that will listen, and even to those that won't listen. But tell your story, and you control your narrative, because that's the only way that people will appreciate what you're trying to do. We are the leaders. We are the guardians. In many cases, I think a lot of us are here, and we're associated with increasing and concerned with increasing the numbers of underrepresented minorities in the STEM fields. And we have to be that guardian. And one of the ways that we maintain our relevance throughout the life cycle of our grants is to tell our story and find out what will captivate whom. You know, the high-level university administrator may need a different message than a faculty member or a student or the funding agency or someone external. So we have to tailor our messaging. I'll get more to that a little bit later. But tell your story, and that's a very important thing. On a separate note, and a side note, I will always, this is just strictly administrative, always keep your own set of books. Always. When you're dealing with alliances, and you got multiple institutions, you got invoices and contracts flying all over the place, you need to not just by default allow just the record keeping of your institution or whoever it is that does it, but keep your own set of books. We do that. We've done that from the start. And speaking of business, that's how I landed in the LSAMP program. The original PI said, I have no idea what's going on with my money. They're saying I got this, I don't have this, I don't know. I need someone who understands. And I came in, I had experience as an accountant, or actually in tax accounting. I did partnership in corporate tax in Atlanta with a global firm. And at that time, I moved back to Tallahassee. My daughter was being born. My wife decided she didn't like Atlanta, and so we packed up like the hillbillies and moved to Tallahassee. So, baby on the way, I need a job. Okay, I'll take it. But I had a tough time reconciling, and I had to do 5 years worth of reconciliation to get her to a place where she knew where her money was. The university at that time did not keep very good records. Everybody was on different systems. You know, things were recognized but not recorded. Some things were recorded but not recognized, so forth and so on. So it's always good to keep your own books for that purpose. Have someone dedicated to do that. I have a person now who's part-time, but I think she's burning out because it's more work than she suspected. There are always issues that come up. There are, double payments, non-payments. Sometimes it's not reflected on the system. So you have to have something and reconcile periodically. Just reconcile periodically with your administration, with your whoever it is that keeps your books for the university. So in my case, we have 3 or 4 different entities. We have our contracts and grants. We have our sponsored programs. We also have our controller's office, and sometimes purchasing plays a part in that. And if we all sit down at this table together and say, okay, what's the financial position of the Lewis Stokes program, we'll all come up with something different. What's the financial position that is? And so it's important that you maintain, because then you have notes and you can explain, and you can also take into account, the things that they don't take into account. The system itself, the reporting system may be in error. And so you have to be able to explain that, because as we get to the end of our rope, so to speak, we now have to start managing our funds a little differently. And so we have to know exactly what we're working with. And I think you will have to do the same. And if you ever have to experience an audit or have to participate in an audit, you'll find that having your own books makes a lot of sense. And so this is not condemning the universities, but it's just saying that this is important. And I'll say this to that point. Years ago, we had, I think it was state auditors came in to FAMU. They wanted to audit. And lo and behold, I get a call, sponsor research. We need your records. And they use my records to present. I swear, I hope my administration is not looking on the live stream. But this is a different administration. But that was a real case. And so it is important. And a lot of times I find that this is one of the things that's overlooked a lot. And it doesn't take a lot, but you need to reconcile. You need to call up your partner institutions and call their fiscal offices and say, I want to do a reconciliation. Can you send me your invoicing and billing transactions summary report? And then compare to what you have. And it's a good way to guide all the way through. So I did want to say that. I got off into that a little more than I wanted to, but that is important. I really believe it. And so I hope you will walk away with that, if nothing else. The other characteristic of leading an alliance is that this is hard stuff. And it's almost schizophrenic in a sense. It puts you in that state because you're at a constant tug of war. And I know that through our regular work we're at a constant tug of war, but in this case, this is multiple institutions, different scales, different sizes, and different capabilities, and so you deal with a lot of things and you're tugged all the time. Whenever you do something that is administratively focused, you also have to then think about how does that affect the programmatic side. And when you do something that's programmatic, you also have to think about how does that impact the administrative side. So you're always in a constant tug of war. And when people ask you to do X, Y, Z, or we need more money for this project or something of that nature, then you have to think about it in a broader sense. And so I think, getting used to that, being tugged all the time. As I said, I had a call at 8:23. I actually had one last night, and I have to get back to both of them today. And I'm sure there's something. But there's always a constant tug of war, so to speak. Leading alliance will also allow you, if you have an acting bug, I know we got an art person here, but it allows you to play several roles, all in the same day. You can play the Good Shepherd, you will be the Wicked Witch, you will even be Ebenezer Scrooge, you'll be Charlie Brown sometimes. And then there are those days that you will be Dr. Phil. And you have a number of things that come at you daily. And most of these happen before you get to what you're trying to accomplish in your programs. So you may have a challenge with a partner institution. There's some issue. You have budget, finance, and fiscal management issues. You have reporting and compliance issues. You may even have personnel issues, subcontracting matters, audits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these things have you all over the place. And generally, they're external factors that pull you one way or the other, because there's always an urgent matter on the horizon, and you have to do that as well as try to still get your job done. So I think I'm describing what most of you do, whether you're in an alliance or not. But these are things that you have to consider. And so I always modify the carpenter's creed. They say measure twice and cut once. I say think twice and act once. And you really have to do that. And that helps you to not make rash decisions, because as soon as you make a rash decision, everything else starts to get out of line. Now, the important part of what we do, I think that really the meat of what we do, is really all about relationship building. And I saw, where's Michael? There he is over there. And the first thing I heard out of his mouth last night was talking about networking. And so as the point person, you are connected. You will be connected. You will talk more than you may otherwise do on your normal day-to-day. I have friends that complain because they have a hard time reaching me sometimes, but they don't realize that sometimes I talk all day on the phone as well as communicate otherwise, and in the evening I'm just talked out. But it's because it's all about relationship building. So as you begin your alliance, know that it is about relationship building. You are building relationships at your home institution, and you also have to build those relationships at your partner institutions. And so it's an ongoing process. But not only that, then on behalf of the project, you are to build relationships with other organizations, other people, creating networks, so that the life of your program starts to move and has a way to grow. And you can then create more opportunities for the students that you serve. And there's a song, the song that goes, getting to know you, getting to know all about you. Well, in building your alliance, get to know everybody that's associated with your program. Get to know about the institutions, their capacity, again, their culture, and their climate. Also get to know the people that are going to be representing the alliance at those institutions. But you need to get to know them well. And it doesn't mean that we have to be buddy-buddy, but you still need to get to know them well. Because there will come times where situations will come about. And you're going to have to figure out, how do I motivate this person to get things done? How do I deal with this person? And if you've been in the alliance as long as I have, I've been there, seen it all. I won't say seen it all, but have dealt with numerous situations where people have lost a child or had issues with a spouse or whatever the case may be. And they're at a whole different level. And here I come saying, hey, I need X, Y, Z. They're not really responding to that. And so you do sometimes become that person, that ear. But, that doesn't mean that you don't still want to get your work done, but it helps you to understand where they are in the moment and what they may be going through. We had a coordinator that actually lost his son, and it just devastated him. But I think he needed to work to keep himself going, but he was all over the place. I'll just put it that way. But I felt the need to be there because, personal note, I went through a divorce at one point, and he was the guy out of everyone that came and said, hey, what's going on with you? And that made all the difference in the world, because anybody who's been through it knows that it's a life changer. But I felt the need to be there for him as well. And so alliances allow you to become like family, and you're there and you support each other in your work and in your personal. So get to know them, really get to know them. And you'll find that, it works, because what you'll find later, as I'll get to, I'm going to kind of fast forward, what you'll find, part of our nature is that in my position, I don't have a lot of control once something leaves my office. If I want to buy some water, there are about 7 people that have to check off on that. And it's true. It is, and so you don't have control, but you can have influence. But you have influence by building those relationships. I had a case where we had a subcontract, needed to go out. We sent it off. We put it in the format that it needed to go and gave all the information, did everything we were supposed to do, and sent it down to sponsored programs, and they did whatever they did. They forwarded it to the general counsel's office, and it sat, and it sat. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I'm calling, I'm sending emails, I'm threatening. And then I find out that it's just sitting in general counsel's office. Well, what happened there was general counsel's office and sponsored research, they had an argument. And while they were fussing, my subcontract is sitting there, and I've got the coordinator saying, hey, we need our money. But, I had to intervene. I didn't want to, but because I had built a relationship with our general counsel's office, and I imparted to her that all you had to do was come to me and I could have helped you with that. And when I kind of talked her through it, it got moving. They still kept fighting in the end. But again, that's about having influence. And so you have to reach out and build these. These are internal networks that you're building to keep your work flowing, And so it is about that. And also remember that you must try to establish a positive relationship. Doesn't have to be a chummy relationship, but a positive relationship with your program directors, with the National Science Foundation, in my case, National Science Foundation, but with your particular funding agencies. that's a relationship, again, that needs to be built and sustained, because it may not always be positive. I've had numerous arguments with my national director, and he's had some words from me, but we still get along like two peas in a pod. We understand each other, and we understand some of the things that the parameters under which we both have to operate. And so you will get some positive feedback there. And so with all of this relationship building, I think it's important that you make sure that you are able to capture and create feedback loops through this. Informal and formal. Formal, I have people fill out information, and they'll tell me what I really want to know, or what's politically expedient. But it's the informal feedback loops that I really gain more insight. And I don't use it against them, I just use it to provide context. And I think that's important. So as you're managing, realize that everything is not going to be on a form and they fill out the report and tell you X, Y, Z, but it's going to be those informal conversations that you have that will probably give you more insight to what's really going on with them and either the challenges or the opportunities that may prevail at their particular institutions. So, lastly, I will say on this real talk is that, as the saying goes, and you're probably familiar with, the prophet is never welcome, or I'll say welcome warmly, at home. We go out and we do all of this hard work, if you will, developing, maintaining partnerships, networks, alliances, and you come back to your home institution, and some people say, whatever. I've had that happen, and I was very disappointed. This happened many years ago. I was actually given an award somewhere and came back, and I was feeling good about myself, and they even had a publication with my picture and everything, and just like, okay, next, and I was hurt, I was a little younger then, but I was really hurt. I was offended. I'm like, wait a minute, But sometimes what I find is that people don't necessarily, it's not that they don't respect what you do, sometimes they don't really understand what you're doing in terms of the alliances and what it takes to maintain an alliance and what it takes to build an alliance. Oftentimes I've had a case where, using the term other institutions is almost like using a four-letter word. I've gone to my development office and said, hey, I would like for you guys to help us to, raise some money for X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I say alliance and all the other institutions, then the faces turn. Because most institutions don't want to, and I'm going to say it, they don't necessarily want to put their efforts into something that's not going to solely benefit their institution. Even though we are the lead institution of the alliance, however, people are just that way. And I find that at the other institutions as well. So, a part of that team that you need to have and that network that you need to have high-level administrators who can help make things happen. And if you don't have that, then it's going to be a rocky road. But, again, people don't always realize all that you do. And so, if you do get kind of, boring looks when you talk and tell people about what you're doing, it's okay. Because you know what you're doing is of value. And so you have to just maintain that. And so what I'm trying to do is just give a landscape. Now, it's not all, bad. But I am giving what I think is a realistic landscape of what we have to deal with. There are positive things, and I wouldn't be doing this or wouldn't be here after 17 years if I didn't find some value. It's definitely not because of the money. But it's because I have actually developed a love of programs like this, helping to create opportunities. I consider myself, I tell students all the time, I'm your deal maker. I will make it happen. I probably should, well, anyway, I won't talk about the deal maker part. Somebody else claims they're a deal maker too, but anyway, but I said it first. Anyway, but I do. I try to help students where I can, and when I do get those those sour looks or looks of bewilderment by my faculty members or my peers, I'll get a message from a student. And I get them from all over, a card, a thank you, and it makes it all worth it. I mean, it's amazing how spending a short amount of time with a student makes it all worth it. And so when I get those letters and those cards and other things that they may send, it puts a smile on my heart. And it makes me realize that all of the stuff that I've just talked about is worth going through because we do make a difference. And so, keep that in mind. It helps to keep the why of what we do front and center. And so I think we have to always remember that, even when we're talking about things such as evaluation, program outcomes, but sometimes we have to remember why we're doing what we're doing. And that's very important. So what does all of this have to do with evaluation? I think what it has to do with evaluation is that, again, managing and leading an alliance, you got to think about the end goal. What is it that we're trying to achieve? I have up here, and I decided not to really go there, but that second line, the third line, saying moving from organization to organism, what we do, all the things that I talked about is the things that breathe life. We can set up our programs and have all the pieces in place, the functional and tasks and all the personnel in place, but those are just things, they're just organized. But when we breathe life into it, then it becomes alive. So all those things we do bring life to it, but I really meant to take that out because I didn't touch on that. But what does this all have to do with evaluation? Well, from my standpoint, it is about making sure that we move our programs and through the life cycle and look at evaluation as a tool, as a resource, to produce better outcomes, to produce greater successes for the students that we serve. How do we do that? Well, again, we can't be haphazard, we can't be passive, and we need to use some of the tools that are out there. And so there are a million, program management planning tools. Many of you probably have institutions that have them. You go out online, they're all over the place. And I generally take bits and pieces from all. But I think that's the first thing you got to do is always have your plan and keep it in front of you. Even if it's just having the logic model posted on your wall right next to your computer. So I look at that, and that brings me back sometimes when I start finding myself wavering. But I say, okay, what am I really supposed to be doing here? But you need to have that plan so that you can effectively measure the performance of your program. And as all of you know, and this is just boilerplate type stuff here, but it does come at you, and how do you determine things that you want to do, looking at things from a quantitative standpoint as well as a qualitative. Now, we deal with both, but I think the nuances of building and leading an alliance, that qualitative side, really do have a great impact on my decision making. After doing this for quite some time, I kind of have an idea of what to expect. But as a new person, you will need to understand both sides. But where I am at this juncture, we're a mature alliance. And so we pretty much understand what can be done and what will come out. And I think we have that down. But what I think will make the difference is looking at some of those qualitative issues, be they things within how we do what we do, or the students that we serve, what is impacting them, and how do we better address that. So those types of things that can be seen and used as a tool by having a program management plan. The plan will help you to do just that, plan, but it helps you design. It helps you to align your business practices, coordinate your grants. It also allows you to establish systems and procedures and develop performance measures. It also allows you to process how you're going to do things, the approach that you want to take, and allow you to see the tools that you may need in order to do that. What may be the appropriate tool for this approach? And so again, this is boilerplate stuff, but I thought I had to throw it in here nonetheless. The plan also allows you and gives you the opportunity to capture program information at many different levels. And it helps you to develop reporting mechanisms, and you can determine what works for you. You know, some do a yearly reporting, some do quarterly reporting, some do other types of reporting. I'm working with someone now to put a system online so that we can report, I can have people report, and really what that should do at the end of the cycle, it should make us worthy of an evaluation. It should lead us to the evaluation. So I'm trying to put in all of the questions and the metrics so that when we get it, we pretty much have something that is ready for an evaluator. That didn't always happen, and I don't know that it always happens now. And we're still working on it. We just got the first iteration of it. But, you know, I find that important because at the end of the day, and when we had an evaluation not long ago, you know, the evaluator is always very nice. And I said, oh, he's going to give us a pass on that, but he didn't. And I was sitting there reading, I was like, what? You know, and didn't want my boss to see it. You know, it was a whole fiasco. But anyway, but part of that, I believe, was that he was not able to capture all of the information that he needed to capture because we hadn't worked our program. We hadn't managed our program in a way that would lead him to be able to do a quality evaluation. So I think sometimes that may be the crux of the matter. Are we managing and operating a program that will be something that is worthy of evaluation, but something that can be evaluated and evaluated fairly? And so I think that's the point of what I'm trying to say here today. Lastly, boilerplate is, you know, something that I have not done but am starting to do. And I just read about this, but creating a summary of your tools that you use. So when you have to take corrective action measures, when you have to do something outside of norm, or just in your normal day-to-day business practices, what tools are you using to effectively evaluate, to monitor, to look at the performance, and so that we're not rebuilding and creating the wheel all over again every time something changes. So with that, I want to kind of close this presentation out. But again, remember the program management plan, whatever it may look like, is there to help better position your program for quality evaluation. So one of the other things, the last thing I want to share is that the programs that we run, and I have a deep attachment to the program, and I want to see it go on and on and on. Take a phrase from the movie Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear, to infinity and beyond. That is where we want our programs. We want them to live. Effective evaluation, quality evaluation helps that. But what we do every day, we want that work to live on. The work that we do to include more people in the STEM fields, we want that work to live on. So managing properly, having quality evaluations to determine the impact, not just the outcome, but what is the real impact? And can we develop programs that will have a major impact? Again, we are the leaders. We are the guardians, if you will. And so to have a program that will live on, I think we have to constantly promote it. We have to craft those messages and get those messages out all the time. The other last thing is to develop networks, formal and informal. Develop networks with organizations that further your mission, people that you can call upon to engage in collaboration, and also secure resources, create advocates, and explore opportunities for our students to be successful. So the question that you ask at the end of the day, if your program ceased to exist, would it be missed? And I think when you look at it that way, it informs a lot of what we do. And so in my talks, and I'm pretty much done here, but in my talks with some of you, and stories that I've heard, we don't place enough emphasis on evaluation. We don't have enough appreciation for evaluation. And you can tell it because, as they say, you can look at where it falls on the budget, how much is actually allocated to that. We're required to submit evaluation plans, but you see a minimal or nominal amount allocated to that very thing. We fuss with our program officer about that all the time. You're not giving us money to do it, but you want it. So what are we to do? But it is very important if these projects are to go on and take a life of their own. So remember, the work we do through alliances is important because we lay new foundations, we build new roads and bridges, we travel back and forth to the horizon, creating a galvanizing vision to pave the way for a broader, more inclusive, and dynamic STEM community in our country. All this we do to better meet the sustainability and the quality of life demands of our world. Thank you.
We have time for questions.
Okay, all right.
And I'm going to take the mic, this mic, okay? Use that one.
All right.
Robin will take the other.
Okay. If there are any, or if I can just get a collective amen.
Yeah, okay. Okay, here we go. Over here.
Thank you. That was a very stimulating talk. My name is Teresa Murad. I'm with the Ecological Society of America. Actually, twice, I think both Lou and yourself, you both mentioned this, to control your narrative. And not in those words, but same idea. And I can't help wondering if you're in an alliance, aren't you supposed to sort of come to consensus about what the narrative is? And how do you control the narrative when all your partners, as you mentioned, come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different perspectives? So what's the process of doing that?
Well, it is consensus. I mean, I don't just create the message in my office and say, hey, this is what it is. However, when I'm saying control the narrative, just means that make sure that you're telling your story and not have others tell your story or tell it in a way that doesn't demonstrate the value of what you're doing. I often say that my program, because it's been around for so long and we do pretty good work, I will say, but people come to expect that. They treat it, it's almost like we're like furniture, I always say. We're just that couch over in the corner. We function, we do what we're supposed to do, and people don't really notice you. So to make sure that you're relevant, tell your story. Talk about it every chance you get, promote it every chance you get. But again, you tell what's happening in your alliance. You tell of the good things that are going on, and even the challenges, depending on whatever the audience may be. But, I've been in meetings where, it's, well, you didn't do this, or you did this, or whatever the case may be. But I wasn't in control of the messaging that went out, and so others around got a false perception of what was going on. Or, oh, well, you didn't really do this, or you didn't. You have to control that narrative, and many times that means you have to be proactive. You have to get out there first before you get others who, some of that may just be jealousy, may be envy. And so in order for me to look good, I got to put you down. I'll tell the story. You remember Dr. Dale, right? Lou Dale. And Lou Dale used to get us all, he's retired now, so I don't think I have to worry about it. But we would have meetings, and Lou is the kind of guy that would come up and look at something and say, oh, that's not right, and make a fuss, and then he'll exit out the door. Well, then you got your national program manager looking at you, and you got to sit there and try to prove it. So that's what I mean by telling your story. And we were at a meeting one time, he did something similar, and then we're sitting around the table, and then he all of a sudden he says, oh, I got to catch my plane. And I leaned over to the person next to me, I said, that so-and-so got us again. And we all fell out laughing. But that's the kind of thing that you want to avoid. You want to make sure that you're on top and you're proactive and tell your story. Find ways to tell your story.
Question over here.
Christopher Williams, Surveillance Fellow at the National Science Foundation. So you mentioned that when you're building your alliance or anything, you want to have a level of uniformity. I was just wondering, what is the value of having a loose electron?
Well, it keeps you on your toes, I tell you that. But I think it does provide, as I get older, I tend to appreciate that, problems often present opportunities. And so, maybe instead of trying to just corral that electron out there, why is it acting that way? And what are the issues that make it so? And so I think we have to look at that. And so with my partner coordinators, I generally try to have that kind of relationship whereby, okay, you're having trouble doing this. Let's sit down and think about how we can still get to where we want to be, but maybe take an alternate route. And that might be a study in and of itself. I've had one or two that have come and said, hey, I got this great idea. I want to do this with the students. But, I say before we do that, we got to make sure that it still will yield what we're looking for, but how do we make that a study in and of itself? So I think having those loose electrons out there are good for you, because other than that, you tend to just go along and get along. So it does have a way of energizing you, other than the fact that you don't want to have any problems, that reside from it. But overall, I think it provides an opportunity for you to find ways to bring about a solution and make sure that you maintain your program intact.
I don't see another question, but I have one.
Okay.
I was really impressed about the fact that you have your logic model posted there,
Yes.
so you see it. My question is, how do you encourage the other members of the alliance to do the same thing, the leaders of the other components of the alliance? And how have you fostered that, or does it not happen?
Both. What I try to do is I have them yearly take a look at the logic model and say, what progress have you made on this, on these key things? And if I get back the same answers every year, then I know there's a problem in and of itself. But what I do try to do is instill, just like I tried to talk this morning, really trying to reach the consciousness and give them a sense of duty, that we have to do better, that we have to pay attention to the logic model or whatever the tool may be. Give them a sense that this is important work, and don't let them forget that, because sometimes they just take it. People do. I don't want to just say my people, but all people do. At some point, you kind of take things for granted. But you have to constantly, again, so I'm always preaching and telling the story, if you will, to my people, because they need that too. Because after a while, it just becomes a series of functions. So I have to try to then re-engage them and re-energize them. Yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, Ashanti Johnson Mercer, as well as Sirius Academy. What I want to do, he asked for amen too. So I used to be the LSM Bridge to Doctorate coordinator for USF for like 5 years. And so Byron has a unique way of being calm, big brother if he needs to, an advocate, whatever. He talked about different roles, being the conductor in an orchestra to make it all come together. And that's one of the key things for an alliance. So he hears you, he understands, he sees the strengths and know what roles you can play to keep the big picture going. So that's something that he's just been amazing at. But he can also be that authority when need be, get it done when need be. But those things are important when you're working on those big scales. So that's the amen.
All right. Thank you.
All right. There's another question here? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Is that on, Greg? Oh, here,
Use your classroom voice.
You told me not to speak unless I was trained. I've been listening to Lou Gross a long time. Yesterday, there was a slide, great slide, similar to one that Lou had, showing the scales going up from the student
All the way
classroom. And I have an NSF Includes, we have an NSF Includes. And I'm struggling because if they want alliances and if they want a backbone, and yesterday a slide challenge because they said it gets more complex as you go along. Mm-hmm. But if I'm effective at the lower scale, and to me the meaning I'm getting out of complexity is more money, more problems, which would take away from what I'm trying to do. So I guess my question is a statement and a question at the same time. What's the purpose of the alliance in the first place if it's getting more complex? If if it's hindering things, as an assumption.
That's a good question. I believe that the work that we're trying to do through the alliances, the work of the alliances, is probably more effective in an alliance organization. You know, if we simply tried to do what we're doing at Florida A&M University, I don't know that we would be able to build out and scale up and create the pathways, the partnerships as a single institution. I think the alliance gives you leverage, if nothing else. If managed correctly, it will give you leverage. And so through the alliance, I've had great partnerships with other alliances, LSAMP alliances. We share information, we share students, we have paths that go back and forth. And within our alliance, the Florida-Georgia Alliance, you know, I'm able to call my coordinator and say, hey, I have a student that's interested in research in XYZ, and I know that you guys are doing some of that down there. Is there a way to get them? So it creates a pipeline. It creates a pathway for our students that may not be there otherwise. It gives exposure. When you're talking about different levels of institutions, we engage the community college students. We try to integrate them with our undergrad students as well as our graduate students. So they wouldn't get that experience otherwise. We try to find research opportunities for, say, the community college students that they would not necessarily get otherwise. We bring them, in my case, in Tallahassee. We have them go over to Florida State. We have them come to FAMU. And they wouldn't get that experience without being a part of an alliance. So I think the alliance gives you leverage, and it gives you the ability to reach out beyond where you would normally be able to get to. So I think that's the beauty of the alliance. It is more complex, and there's a lot more work to be done, but I think the result in the final product is that it gives you greater leverage to do more things.